Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We are diving into the ultimate cosmic clash between divine order and absolute rebellion. Today's deep dive unpacks the psychology of the ultimate adversary, a throne room attendant turned cosmic rebel, and how his battle against God sets the stage for humanity's greatest struggles. We'll explore ancient texts and John Milton's epic Paradise Regained to understand the intense philosophical war over free will, the allure of self-exaltation over submission to God, and how the temptation of a starving man in the wilderness was designed to answer one question. What does it actually mean to be divine?
Yeah, it's just a massive, sprawling narrative. I mean, it operates on so many levels at once.
Oh, for sure.
We're basically taking the foundational theology of the ancient Hebrews and synthesizing it with a brilliant psychological insight of 17th century English literature.
Right.
And, dissecting the very mechanics of temptation. It's essentially a look at how chaos is introduced into an ordered system.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We really want to synthesize that biblical history and literary genius to understand the nature of God, the vulnerability of humanity, and really the roots of spiritual rebellion.
Precisely. Because, when you strip away the mythology...
Sunday school stuff.
Exactly. This rebellion is essentially the ultimate atheistic rejection of divine authority. It's that primal desire to, become your own God.
To dictate your own reality.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore how that desire manifests not just in ancient texts, but in the very fabric of human empires. But before we jump into the ancient world, I want to say to you listening, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand this epic battle in the wilderness, we have to understand the enemy, right?
We do, yeah, absolutely.
We need to know who was actually orchestrating this cosmic pushback. So, the Satan. It's less like a guy with a pitchfork.
Right, less like a cartoon.
Yeah, and more like, a disgruntled former executive attempting a hostile takeover. His entire identity is defined by being anti-everything.
That's a great way to put it. But to see that clearly, we really have to strip away centuries of pop culture baggage.
Okay, where do we start?
Well, if we look at the ancient Hebrew perspective, starting in Genesis, God creates this beautifully ordered reality, right, out of a dark, formless void.
Right.
And he appoints humans to rule over it. But, and this is key, specifically as his representatives, they're operating under his wisdom.
Okay.
But almost immediately, this spiritual rebel introduces chaos.
The snake.
Exactly. But the brilliance of this rebel lies in his methodology. He doesn't bring in an opposing army to overpower the humans physically.
Because he couldn't, right?
Right. He doesn't have that kind of power. Instead, he tricks them into ruling by their own wisdom instead of God's. It's a philosophical coup. He convinces humanity that self-governance, completely apart from divine order, is what true freedom looks like.
Okay, wait. I want to go back to the snake thing. Because the imagery we all know is literally a garden snake hanging from an apple tree branch.
Yeah, the classic Renaissance painting vibe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the ancient texts, when you read them in context, they paint a much more intimidating picture of this entity.
They absolutely do. Yeah, the clues are embedded right there in the original language. This wasn't just a reptile.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Really. If you look at the prophet Isaiah's vision of God's heavenly throne room, he describes the attending spiritual creatures, the guardians of the divine presence, as seraphim.
Seraphim, okay.
And when you translate that ancient Hebrew word, seraphim literally means burning ones, or, interestingly, serpents.
Whoa. So the snake in the garden was actually a seraph.
Exactly.
Like a high-ranking divine throne room attendant. That completely flips the power dynamic. We aren't talking about a garden pest here.
No, not at all.
We're looking at like a prime minister of the cosmos deciding he wants the throne.
And that ambition, it's baked right into the title he's eventually given. Notice I said title, right? Satan is not a first name.
Oh, really? I always thought it was just his name.
It's a common misconception. In the original Hebrew texts, it always appears with the definite article in front of it. So it's ha-Satan, which translates directly to the adversary. Or the slanderer.
The slanderer.
Yeah, it's literally a job description.
I love that linguistic detail because it fundamentally changes how we view him. Like I said earlier, he's that disgruntled executive. He knows he can't fire the CEO, so he goes down to the factory floor.
Humanity.
Right. And he convinces the middle managers to go on strike. He convinces them to run the machines themselves, knowing full well it will burn the factory down.
Yep, because he doesn't have a creative bone in his body.
Right. His only move is corrupting what already exists.
Yeah.
But this rebellion didn't stop in Eden, did it? It scaled up.
It scaled up dramatically, yeah. The texts reveal that this atheistic spiritual rejection of God began to manifest in human society on a massive systemic level.
Because he didn't act alone. He recruited other spiritual beings to join this middle management strike.
He did. The ancient texts mention the sons of God, this sort of divine council, basically breaking rank as well. The rebellion becomes structural.
Okay, how so?
Well, in Genesis chapter 6, the texts describe these rebellious spiritual beings crossing the ultimate boundary, actually mingling with humans to create these violent warrior giants.
Oh, right, the Nephilim.
Yes, the Nephilim. It is a total corruption of the human bloodline to produce beings defined entirely by violence and domination.
Oh.
And then, just a few chapters later in Genesis 10, the narrative introduces a human king named Nimrod.
And his name literally sounds like the Hebrew word for rebel, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
unsurprisingly. And Nimrod is the architect of Babylon, which becomes the ultimate biblical symbol of human self-exaltation. I mean, they build a ziggurat, a tower to the heavens, not to worship God, but to basically bring God down to their level, to control the divine.
It's the ultimate human empire saying, we don't need divine authority. We have our own engineering, our own hierarchy, and we're our own gods.
Exactly. And this is where the spiritual and the political really merge. Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, was the first to explicitly call these lesser rebellious spiritual beings demons.
Okay, demons.
And in this narrative, demons aren't just spooky ghosts haunting a graveyard. They are the insidious forces animating corrupt human power structures.
They become the gods of the nations.
Exactly. They are the unseen forces driving the worship of money, the exploitation of sex, and the relentless pursuit of military dominance.
Okay, I have to push back on that for a second because that is a massive claim.
Fair enough.
If demons are essentially the animating forces behind systemic greed and military dominance, does that mean every human empire, every superpower in history is inherently built on a rejection of God?
Well, think about how an empire actually survives and expands.
Through force.
Right. It requires the accumulation of wealth, strictly enforced borders, and usually extreme violence or the threat of violence to protect those things.
True.
The moment humans decided to secure their own safety through military might and economic hoarding, rather than trusting divine providence, they created a system based on self-preservation at all costs.
And spiritual forces of chaos easily manipulate that fear.
Precisely. The mechanics of empire building, crushing your enemies, exploiting the weak for labor, exalting a human ruler to godlike status, those are the exact opposite of the divine order, which is built on self-sacrificial love and stewardship.
So in this theological framework, empires are basically the avatars of that original Edenic rebellion.
Yes, essentially.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the ultimate countermove, because to counter this massive systemic rebellion, this entrenched system of demonic empires, God doesn't send a bigger army.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't send a celestial nuke. He sends a single, vulnerable human representative into the exact same chaotic wilderness. Enter Jesus.
The contrast is staggering. And the timeline of how this unfolds is critical. Jesus is baptized. The texts say the Holy Spirit descends on him like a dove, visually confirming his identity as the divine Son.
Right.
And immediately following this highest of highs, he is driven out into the desolate wilderness where he fasts for 40 days.
And who is watching this entire spectacle unfold? The adversary.
He's been waiting for thousands of years.
Just biding his time.
Exactly. He knows the ancient prophecy from the Garden of Eden that a human seed, a descendant of the woman, would eventually arrive to bruise the serpent's head.
Right.
He has been watching humanity fail generation after generation. But when he sees the dove at the baptism, the cosmic alarm bells ring, he realizes, uh-oh, this might be the guy.
I find the strategic, almost militaristic element of this so compelling. John Milton expands on this beautifully in his epic poem, Paradise Regained.
He really does.
Milton imagines Satan gathering his demonic council in the air to assess the threat. They realize they can't fight Jesus in a direct physical war, right? They already tried a heavenly war before time began and lost spectacularly.
Right, a frontal assault won't work.
So Satan realizes he has to use psychological warfare. He has to use the exact same playbook that worked on Adam and Eve. Temptation through pride.
And this actually brings up a massive theological debate from John Milton's time, which he brilliantly baked right into the narrative of the poem.
Oh, the paradox of Jesus' dual nature.
Yes, the Hyperstatic Union. The debate goes like this. If Jesus is omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful God in human flesh, then isn't temptation just a rigged game?
Yeah, how can you genuinely tempt someone who already knows everything that will ever happen and has infinite power to stop it?
Exactly.
It's like if I know the exact mechanics of a magician's trick, I'm not going to be fooled by the illusion. Or, if I have $1 billion in the bank, offering me 20 bucks to steal a loaf of bread isn't a real temptation.
That's the exact problem Milton wrestles with. But the theological consensus, which Milton adopts and explores, is that while Jesus possessed perfect divine wisdom and a mind aligned with God, he willingly bound himself to the absolute limits of human physical reality.
He didn't use his divinity as a shield against human suffering.
Right. After 40 days, he genuinely felt the agonizing physiological effects of starvation. He felt the biting cold of the desert night, the profound psychological isolation.
Wow.
The mind was divine, but the experience was entirely painfully human.
Now here's where it gets really interesting for me and why this deeply matters to you listening. A sinless representative without the true agonizing human experience of temptation is completely meaningless to us.
It loses its power.
Exactly. If Jesus isn't genuinely struggling, if he has like a cheat code turned on, his victory means nothing for humanity's redemption.
God even points out in Milton's narrative that Jesus is more like the steadfast, suffering Job than the easily swayed Adam.
He has to feel the absolute fire of human desperation.
He does. And with Jesus fully experiencing that intense, raw vulnerability, Satan launches his strategic attacks. The adversary's ultimate goal is to prove that Jesus is fundamentally no different than Lucifer himself.
Just another ego.
Exactly. He wants to prove that underneath the pious exterior, this human is just another being driven by a pride, ego, and self-interest. If he can expose a flaw, the divine plan crumbles.
So let's break down the psychology of how Satan orchestrates this, because it is masterclass level manipulation. He doesn't start with grandiose offers of world domination, does he?
No. He starts with the immediate screaming needs of the flesh. Strike one is the bread.
Because Jesus is literally starving to death.
Right. And in Milton's version, Satan doesn't look like a monster. He is disguised as a harmless, impoverished old man gathering firewood in the desert.
Just some guy.
Yeah. He strikes up a conversation and essentially says, hey, you're the prophesied son of God, right? Look at us. I'm hungry. You're starving. God seems to have abandoned you out here. Just turn these useless desert rocks into bread. Save yourself.
Which seems so entirely reasonable. It's a temptation of practicality and survival. Why should the Son of God starve?
But Jesus sees the hook hidden in the bait. He counters by quoting the ancient laws of Moses, saying that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.
Because Moses and Elijah also endured fasting in the wilderness.
Exactly. The trap here is about bypassing the human experience. If Jesus uses his divine power to instantly solve his physical discomfort, he breaks solidarity with humanity.
He would be using divine power for self-service.
Which is the very definition of the adversary's rebellion.
So Satan realizes his initial strategy failed. He is dealing with a totally different caliber of human intellect. So he retreats and regroups with his demon council in the clouds.
Yes.
And Milton includes a moment here that is just objectively hilarious, but it serves a brilliant narrative purpose. Belial, who's an ancient demon of lust and sheer wickedness, pipes up with a tactical suggestion.
Oh, this is a great scene. Belial looks at the situation and says, let's tempt him with women. It worked on King Solomon, and Solomon was supposed to be the wisest man alive. Set up a honey trap.
And Satan just shoots him down with such contempt. He basically yells, Belial, you always suggest women. That's how he got the giant flood back in the days of Noah, remember?
Ha, right.
You guys couldn't control yourselves with the daughters of men and ruined everything. I mean, Satan is arrogant, but he isn't stupid.
Not at all.
He knows that Jesus is driven by profound, world-altering wisdom, not base, momentary physical lust, like you can't catch a whale with a fishing worm.
It is a funny moment, but it highlights Satan's cunning adaptability. He recognizes he has to tailor the temptation to the specific magnitude of the target.
Okay, so what's strike two?
Well, since he can't exploit Jesus' physical body through starvation or lust, he decides to exploit his ambition. He moves to the temptation of glory and power. Satan returns to the wilderness, dropping the old man disguise. Now he appears as a rich, opulent nobleman. He conjures a massive Arthurian-style banquet right in the middle of the barren woods.
Tables groaning under exotic meats and wines.
Exactly.
Just laying out a Michelin star feast to taunt a man who hasn't eaten in over a month.
But Jesus completely ignores the food. He isn't moved. So Satan pivots to the real prize. He offers him worldly power on a silver platter.
We empires.
In a sweeping vision, he shows Jesus the great empires of the world: Rome, Parthia, China, India. He points specifically to Rome and says, look at the Emperor Tiberius. He is a wicked, brutal, depraved monster.
Which he was.
Right. And Satan says, you are supposed to be the prophesied king of justice. Why wait? Take my armies, conquer Rome, depose the tyrant, and rule the world right now with perfect divine justice.
And Jesus' refusal here is a total paradigm shift for how we understand authority.
It really is.
He tells Satan that true kingship isn't about sitting on a golden throne and dominating others with a sword. It's about mastering your own spirit. He even surprisingly cites the Greek philosopher Socrates as an example of nobility and poverty.
Showing that true authority doesn't require an army.
Yeah. But think about this for a second. Why would Satan offer Jesus the exact kingdoms Jesus is already prophesied to inherit? It seems completely redundant.
That question cuts to the absolute core of the psychological trap. Satan is offering the right thing, but at the wrong time and through the wrong method. Taking the easy, violent, self-exalting route now would mean rejecting God's timeline and God's nature. Remember what we discussed about empires being built on violence and self-preservation?
Right, the demonic avatars.
Exactly. If Jesus uses demonic military force to establish his kingdom, he adopts the methodology of the enemy. He becomes exactly like Satan.
Wow.
He would be endorsing the very atheistic rebellion he came to defeat, the toxic idea that the end justifies the means, completely independent of divine will.
It's the ultimate shortcut. Satan is whispering, you can have the crown without the cross. You can have the victory without the suffering.
Right.
It's an incredibly seductive offer for anyone who wants to do good, but is exhausted by the slow, painful process of doing it the right way.
Precisely. And when these highly logical, incredibly seductive appeals to earthly glory and practical power completely fail, Satan's cool, calculating facade just shatters.
He loses it.
Completely. The conflict transitions from a polite philosophical chess match into something deeply personal, raw, and intensely psychological.
Which brings us to the climax of the wilderness narrative.
Yeah.
Satan is deeply frustrated. He realizes he's losing control of the narrative, so he resorts to pure terrorism.
Physical intimidation.
Right. While Jesus is trying to sleep on the cold, hard ground, Satan unleashes a terrifying thunderstorm. Hurricane force winds, blinding lightning, trees being torn out by the roots, spectral terrors shrieking in the dark.
Absolute chaos.
And the next morning when the sun comes up, Satan claims this storm is an omen. He tells Jesus, this chaos is just a taste of the miserable, tortured life you will have if you don't align with me.
And Jesus is completely unfazed by the theatrics.
Barely blinks.
He looks at the destruction and essentially says, I know you caused the storm. Stop playing games. You don't control my destiny.
Yeah.
And this is the moment where the adversary truly breaks. Milton writes this incredible piece of dialogue where Satan, stripped of his smooth rhetoric, screams in sheer anguish, "The Son of God I also am," or was.
Oh man, or was. That phrasing just hits you right in the chest. It's devastating.
It's pure, unfiltered tragedy. I mean, underneath all the malice, all the grandstanding, and the empire building, the deep tragedy of Satan's existence is his unbearable, consuming jealousy.
He just can't stand it.
He simply cannot comprehend why God loves this fragile, dirt-born human more than him. He is a being who used to be a chief angel, bathed in the unapproachable light of the throne room.
And now?
Now he is looking at a dirty, starving carpenter in a wasteland and thinking, what makes you so special? Why him and not me?
And driven by this desperate, clawing need to expose Jesus as a fraud, Satan uses his power to physically transport him. Strike three.
Yes.
He places Jesus on the absolute highest pinnacle of the massive temple in Jerusalem. It's a dizzying, lethal drop. And he delivers his final, ultimate demand. He says, if you are truly the Son of God, prove it. Jump.
And he quotes scripture here.
Right. The devil quotes the psalm saying the texts say God's angels will catch you before you hit the stones.
And we have to ask, why the temple? Why not a random mountain?
Because there's an audience.
Exactly. The temple is public. It is the absolute center of the religious world. Satan is saying, perform for them, prove your divinity, make God save you, demand that the universe bend to your will right now to validate your ego.
The ultimate demand for self-exaltation disguised as an act of faith. And Jesus' final move is breathtaking, precisely because of what he doesn't do. He doesn't call down an army of angels. He doesn't float gently to the ground to the applause of the crowds below.
Go theatre.
He just balances there on the terrifying pinnacle, looks at the ultimate adversary of the cosmos, and simply says, "Tempt not the Lord thy God."
He completely refuses to demand proof from God.
Hmm.
He refuses to manipulate the divine will for a spectacle.
Right.
He rests entirely in his identity without feeling the slightest need to perform it or defend it.
The brilliance of this moment is that Satan desperately wanted Jesus to show off. Because performing a miracle just to satisfy an adversary's taunt, just to protect your own pride and prove your status, is an act of pure ego.
It's playing Satan's game.
If Jesus had jumped, even if angels had caught him, he would have played that game. He would have centered his own glory. Jesus wins the ultimate cosmic battle by refusing to play the ego game at all.
And utterly bested by this display of true, unshakable humility, Satan literally loses his footing. Milton's poem describes him falling from the pinnacle of the temple like a griffin plunging into the deep.
Wow.
In that moment of defeat, he realizes the ancient prophecy from Genesis has come true. The serpent's head has indeed been bruised, not by a physical sword, not by a conquering army, but by perfect, unwavering obedience to the divine order.
And as the devil falls away in defeat, the text says the angels finally descend. They minister to Jesus, setting a lavish table of heavenly food right there in the middle of nowhere.
The lost paradise.
Exactly. The lost paradise of the Garden of Eden, that communion between God and humanity, is conceptually regained. Not in a lush garden, but right there in the harsh, barren dirt of the wilderness.
The disastrous rebellion of Adam is completely undone by the steadfastness of Christ. The chaos introduced by the adversary, which infected the whole world, is finally met with an unshakable order of the Spirit.
It completely revolutionizes how we are supposed to view power. We've seen how Satan, the ultimate rebel, equated power with domination, visibility, and self-glorification. He believed that to be divine meant to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and force others to applaud you for it. But the wilderness narrative argues that the greatest display of absolute power in the universe is the profound ability to hold it back. But it leaves you with a lingering question. When you look at our modern era, our entire culture is built on the exact things the adversary offered. We are obsessed with building your own empire, manifesting your own reality, and being the main character of your own universe. We celebrate relentless self-promotion as the highest virtue. So are we actually as enlightened and free as we think we are? Or are we just eagerly playing the adversary's ancient game of self-exaltation, completely unaware that we are burning the factory down from the inside? What does it say about the human condition that we so often demand God prove himself on our terms, just as the adversary did on top of the temple?